Welcome back to the channel, and don't forget to subscribe if you are new here so you never miss important updates. The story of Tyler Robinson, the 22-year-old accused of assassinating Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk, is already one of the most polarizing criminal cases in recent American history. The event itself was shocking enough. A high-profile political figure gunned down in front of an audience during a university appearance, sending ripples across the country and sparking immediate debates about security, extremism, and political violence. But as the facts of the case have unfolded, another battle has erupted, not inside a courtroom, but in the world of media coverage. Several major outlets, including ABC News, CNN, and others, have faced accusations of softening the image of Robinson, with critics charging that they have crossed a line between reporting and empathizing. It is a controversy that goes beyond one reporter or one article and touches on the larger issue of how journalism frames those accused of the most heinous crimes. At the center of the criticism is ABC News correspondent Matt Gutman, who described text messages Robinson sent to his partner shortly before the alleged shooting as very touching. In another context, those words might have seemed innocuous, simply reflecting the human detail of a suspect's final communications before committing violence. But in the context of a high-profile assassination, the phrasing was immediately seen by many as inappropriate, insensitive, and even apologetic toward a man charged with political murder. Gutman later apologized, saying he regretted the wording and did not intend to minimize the crime. Yet the damage had been done, as clips of the segment circulated widely online, fueling accusations that the media was trying to humanize a suspect rather than focusing on the victim and the crime itself. The broader coverage of Robinson has also leaned heavily into his personal background, relationships, and state of mind. Articles have highlighted his relationship with a transgender partner and roommate, his apparent shift in political ideology, and his mental health struggles, including the fact that he has been placed in a suicide prevention smock while awaiting trial. Reports have explored his family background, how his upbringing in a conservative household may have clashed with his later political leanings, and how this transformation might have factored into his alleged motivations. On their own, these details are not unusual. Journalists often seek to provide full portraits of suspects in major crimes, aiming to explain what led them to their actions. But critics argue that the tone and framing in this case risked slipping from explanation into sympathy, creating the impression that media outlets were acting as apologists for Robinson. The controversy is sharpened by the political context. Charlie Kirk was not just any public figure, but a prominent conservative activist, the founder of Turning Point USA, a group dedicated to mobilizing young conservatives and challenging what it sees as liberal dominance in education and culture. His critics on the left have long accused him of fueling division, while his supporters hail him as a courageous voice pushing back against progressive orthodoxy. Because Kirk was such a polarizing figure, his assassination has inevitably been interpreted through the lens of America's political divides. In that environment, any sign that media outlets are treating the accused with empathy rather than condemnation can quickly be construed as partisan bias, particularly by those who already distrust mainstream outlets and see them as leaning left. The reality is more complicated. Journalists have a professional obligation to report all sides of a story, even when that means including information about suspects that may humanize them. A complete account of a crime involves not only what happened, but also why it happened and who was involved, including the suspect's background, beliefs, and personal life. In this sense, reporting on Robinson's texts to his partner, his ideological journey, or his mental state is legitimate and arguably necessary. But the question is how those details are framed. When reporters use language that carries emotional weight, very touching, tragic, heartbreaking, they risk shifting the audience's sympathy, even inadvertently, from the victim to the accused. That risk is particularly high in cases of political violence, where emotions are already running hot and where many people are inclined to interpret media choices through the lens of partisan bias. The criticism of media coverage is therefore partly about tone and partly about proportionality. Critics argue that too much emphasis has been placed on Robinson's struggles and too little on the devastating impact of Kirk's death. By focusing on Robinson's emotional messages or mental state, the coverage may give the impression that his actions were the product of a troubled mind deserving of understanding, rather than the deliberate choice of a political assassin. This is particularly sensitive given that prosecutors have presented evidence of premeditation. Robinson allegedly left a note, sent messages outlining his plans, and took steps to cover his tracks, including instructing others to delete evidence. Such details suggest not an impulsive act by a disturbed individual, but a carefully planned attack. In that light, coverage that highlights his emotional or personal struggles may come across as minimizing the seriousness of his alleged crime. Another aspect of the criticism concerns balance. Responsible reporting would include details about the suspect, but would also keep the focus on the victim, the crime, and its consequences. In this case, some critics feel that the coverage has leaned too far toward telling Robinson's story rather than Kirk's. While there have been tributes to Kirk and coverage of the shock among his supporters, much of the media attention has been drawn to Robinson's background, his transformation, and his state of mind. This imbalance can create the perception that the suspect is the more interesting or sympathetic figure, overshadowing the life and legacy of the victim. Underlying all of this is the larger issue of trust in media. Public confidence in mainstream outlets is already at historic lows, with conservatives in particular viewing organizations like ABC News and CNN as biased against them. In that environment, even small missteps in language or emphasis can have outsized consequences. A phrase like very touching, which might have passed with little notice in another context, can become explosive when attached to the assassination of a conservative leader. The backlash in this case reflects not only frustration with the coverage itself, but also deeper suspicions that the media as a whole is hostile to conservative figures and more sympathetic to those who oppose them. At the same time, it is important to recognize the challenges journalists face. Reporting on major crimes inevitably involves presenting information that may elicit sympathy for suspects, whether it is about their childhood, their mental health, or their final communications. Avoiding all human detail would leave coverage sterile and incomplete, but including it runs the risk of seeming apologetic. The line between explanation and justification is a fine one, and journalists must tread carefully to avoid crossing it. In this case, some reporting choices clearly struck many as crossing that line, even if unintentionally. One way forward is for media outlets to be more self-aware about the language they use and the framing they adopt. Humanizing details can be reported, but they should be presented with neutral language rather than adjectives that imply judgment. Instead of describing Robinson's texts as very touching, for example, a reporter might simply note that he sent messages expressing affection for his partner before the attack. The facts themselves convey the detail without the need for evaluative language that risks shifting sympathy. Similarly, coverage of his mental health or background should be placed in clear context, emphasizing that these details may help explain but do not excuse the alleged crime. Another important principle is proportionality. Stories about Robinson's background should be balanced with coverage of Kirk's life, his work, and the impact of his death. Tributes from family, friends, and supporters should not be relegated to secondary status, while the suspect's personal journey dominates the narrative. By ensuring that the victim's story is given equal or greater prominence, media outlets can avoid the perception that they are more interested in understanding the criminal than honoring the victim. The implications of this controversy extend beyond the Robinson case. Political violence in America is a growing concern, with both left-wing and right-wing actors involved in recent incidents. How the media covers such events will play a major role in shaping public understanding and response. If coverage is perceived as biased or apologetic, it risks further polarizing the country and eroding trust in journalism. On the other hand, if coverage is careful, balanced, and transparent, it can help the public grapple with these difficult issues in a constructive way. The Robinson case is also a reminder of the delicate balance between legal principles and media framing. In the American system, suspects are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Media coverage must reflect this, avoiding language that presumes guilt before trial. At the same time, coverage must also take seriously the evidence presented and the gravity of the charges. This balancing act is never easy, especially in cases as politically charged as the assassination of a conservative leader. Yet it is precisely in such cases that careful, responsible journalism is most needed. Ultimately, the controversy over media coverage of Tyler Robinson reflects both the difficulties of responsible reporting and the deep divisions of the American public. For many conservatives, the perception that mainstream outlets are sympathizing with the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk confirms their long-held belief that the media is stacked against them. For journalists, the challenge is to present the facts fully without falling into language or framing that undermines their neutrality. In an era of hyperpartisanship, even small slips can be magnified, fueling outrage and deepening mistrust. The tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death deserves to be covered with gravity, balance, and respect. Tyler Robinson's background and state of mind are relevant and worth reporting, but not in a way that risks minimizing the seriousness of his alleged crime or shifting sympathy away from the victim. The lesson for journalists is not to shy away from humanizing details, but to present them with care, neutrality, and context. For the public, the challenge is to demand accountability from the media while also recognizing the complexity of responsible reporting. The way this case is covered will not only shape perceptions of Robinson and Kirk, but will also serve as a test of the media's ability to handle political violence with fairness and integrity.